of I, it. And then he says this interesting thing. So far we're together. This seems less inscrutable and more like poetry, something that could speak to us in a different way. Poetry is using language in a different way. And that's actually a definition that Buber gave to poetry in another work. And he's using language in a different way. So the primary word I-U can only be spoken with the whole being. What does that mean, the whole being? It means that I'm bringing to it something that I'm not used to bringing. For example, if I'm talking about how the camera is working, no matter what I say, how smart it is, nothing changes in me. I don't have to bring my whole being. I just bring a part of me that's technologically adept to talk about the camera. When I'm talking in second person to a person, let's say, then I'm bringing everything that I can bring. When he says the whole being, you'll see that when you think about it, if everybody could bring the whole being all the time, then nothing would need to change. But what he means by whole being is more of the whole being than the last time. In other words, something grows. You'll see that in the second article in the reading, that there's something that can grow so that the I, that might be me, excuse me. That's just a reminder for anybody else. When I bring more than I'm used to bringing, now how does this look in a relationship? You know, when you come out of a therapy session and you say to people, because you know, it's always hard to say, did something happen? Did something not happen? We have content, do we have process? That process is something that happens between people, that relationships change. So if you ask, let's say you're dealing with a couple, and you ask the husband, is there something new that you've either said or heard that you haven't heard before or haven't said before? And the same for the wife. Is there something that happened in the room that's a little different than what you've heard before? Something new. That's what we're talking about in terms of whole being, that you're bringing more of your being. In other words, that the husband who can say to his wife, I just am afraid to express how weak I feel. I think you need me to be strong always. This is kind of happens in like 80% of couples. And I have the feeling that you think that I need to be strong all the time. And I can never tell you when I feel not confident. I tell my Rebbe, but I don't tell you. And now I'm telling you, okay? So when I'm telling you that, I'm bringing more of myself into the second person than was there before. And if the wife is able to hear it, so something new has happened between the two people. They've said something or heard something that they haven't been able to hear before. Not a content, an aspect of the relationship, right? So when Buber says that I, thou is said only with the entire being, you have to take him down a rung, right? That's like the ultimate I, you. And if you think about differentiation, so you never reach it. You're always on the way to it. So the I, you is said when more is expressed than has been expressed before, when more is present than has been present before, and then it tends to grow. Whereas the I, it can never be spoken with the whole being. And so if you ask people after a session, okay, well this was interesting, because we learned about this fact and that fact and the other fact. Something happened between the two of you? And the answer is no. So back to the drawing board. Because the question in each session is, are we making the I-U relationship come alive in the room? Now, when it comes alive in the room, the main thing we want to do is give it privilege, right? Because the I-U relationship is where people grow. How do they grow? Because more of me has become present. And so the relationship is growing. Those are the moments of co-creation, right? And those moments of co-creation, if you recall when we talked about differentiation, that's the piece of differentiation that Bowen did with his father, but didn't talk about, because he was a man in America in the 70s, and nobody talked about relationships. People only talk about the individual. And the assumption was, if you get the individual tweaked up right, then all the relationships will be solved. Who said that? Freud. Was he right? 50%, which is a lot. In other words, Freud and Buber stood back to back. Freud's feeling was, what ruins people's relationships? The neurosis. What's a neurosis? A partial I. a partial I, an I that's worried that if I say that I'm dependent, then the sky will fall, because that's how I felt when I was 4, right? So Freud gets you, CBT does it the short way, but Freud gets you to understand that that's not necessarily a way that you have to limit your relationships. And then what? Once you realize that, Freud says, go live, love, work. But I don't know anything about that. That's about relationships. I don't know about that. I know about what's limiting you from being an I. Buber took the other side. That's why they stood back to back and said, no, it's not quite that way. If you change your relationships, that will change the I. When something happens between people, then something goes on inside that can't happen when it's just about it. It's just the content. Was he right? Another 50%. Right? And then there's a few other 50% by other people who have spoken. And when you are with clients, you wonder what's the 50% that's right for them. In other words, is it useful to think about the past? Is it useful to make the present change? And there's to and fro, isn't there? Right? In therapy, you're always going between Freud and Buber. But what we want you to be able to do here is to move between Freud and Buber and not just stay with Freud or CBT or something that only talks about the individual. Family therapy is about changing relationships. And the part of family therapy that's different is the part that works directly on the relationship. Working directly on a relationship is not so easy. In other words, if you read the second article in the reading, you'll see that a lot of people, therapists, say, wait a minute, this is getting too intimate. You know, these two people are creating, I don't want to be here. I want to leave them to do it themselves. But if you're not there, they won't do it themselves. There are times in family therapy where you say to the wife, you know, I think your husband's trying to tell you something he hasn't been able to tell you before. And then you sit beside the wife and say, I'm going to help you to listen. And you're helping the husband as well. But then you stick your nose out of it and let him talk. Let him say something that he hasn't said before. Those, if you think about it, those are the moments of privilege in therapy, but those are moments that make therapists uneasy for two reasons. One is it feels that we're in the bedroom with people, that it's too intimate, that we don't belong there. And the other, which we have to recognize, is that we're jealous, and that those moments are few and far between. And when I am present when it's happening, but I'm not part of it, so I'm out, and they're in. And that's not so easy either. It's a human sense of, you know, maybe I wish I could have that moment. There are therapists who keep trying to talk to the clients instead of letting them talk to each other because they want the I-thou moment for themselves. Sometimes you create that. Sometimes you create an I-thou moment with one of the spouses and then turn them to the other spouse. So it's not that the therapist is never there, but the moments of important creation are face-to-face between members of the family. It could be a father and a son, it could be a mother and a son, where something new happens. And one other thing that's important to recognize is that when it happens, you see, families are always worried about, if I give somebody attention, am I taking attention away from somebody else, right? So moments of I-it are about attention. It's a content, and everybody wants more attention. So the it can't be, has to be divided up, and people are jealous. When there are moments of I-thou, nobody's jealous. In other words, when a parent is creating something new with one child, and there are 8 other children in the room, or 12 other children in the room, they're all noticing that this also could happen for me. In other words, it's not a moment of jealousy, it's a moment of creation, which gives hope for all the other relationships. If you remember Melanie Klein, it's not a moment of schizoid paranoid that if somebody's getting something, it's being taken away from me. The I-thou moments is something that's given and created for the whole family. So you don't find people looking to, wait a minute, it's my turn for I-thou. If people are, it's my turn, it wasn't I-thou. Yeah, Dina.
So can you talk about the place of the I-thou not in a couple session or in a family session, but in an individual session between a therapist and one client?
Right. There's a discussion in psychoanalytic literature about what's called, it's going to sound strange to you, but what's called the real relationship with the therapist. And as you know, and perhaps you don't, Freud had a very real relationship with his clients, but his students and the students of his students kind of dried it up a bit and pulled away from the direct, wild communicating that used to take place in Freud's office. So psychoanalytic literature, especially in the West, in America, became a bit dried up, as if, well, nothing is really happening in the session. Nothing real happens in the session, it's all dramatic. And then, you know, what you do is you simply drive the person crazy by not talking to them. And they create this whole drama, but it's not a drama about you, it's about them and their father, or them and their mother, or whatever. And then you help them to recognize what was going on. In other words, nothing real happened between you and me, it was all drama. Now, no one with any common sense believes that. And especially, no one believes that when we see people once a week. Freud saw people once a day, 6 days a week. You can imagine a whole different scene. In other words, if somebody told the dream, they worked on it for 4 or 5 days, 4 or 5 hours. We don't have that luxury. So you can imagine that in psychoanalysis, it's set up to encourage the drama. That's not what we do today. What we do is something that's much more direct. We're face-to-face with clients. And as a result, those moments are part of the therapy. Now, sometimes it's important for the therapist to recognize that when the person has a moment like that, it's important to talk about where else those moments can take place, because they're not going to stay only in therapy. Therapy may be part of life, but it doesn't replace the other parts of life. And as you know, therapy can be addicting. Like you can come to therapy and skip life, and then nothing's happened, but you've had 30 years of analysis. That's not what we're talking about. So when those moments happen, we want the person to be able to recognize that he's able to enter into those moments, that there's an I from that person that he perhaps hasn't experienced before, that something has happened that's moved him into a different relationship. And that's what we're trying to help him to figure out, where he can have those moments in the rest of his life. It goes back and forth. And sometimes those moments happen and you just leave them alone. You don't have to say anything. I had an artistic young lady who came to see me for a number of years, and one session she simply sat and was silent. And so was I. And I think we were in a different kind of sphere of relating, but it wasn't language. And at the end of the session she said, that was the most important silence of my life. So you'll have clients who'll have important silences. They may not say it. She was an artist, she was able to say it. But those moments are moments that we don't want to skip over. In other words, in supervision, we want to say, there was something in the room. There was something that happened. We don't want to say, well, never mind. Let's just talk about what I learned about his relationships with his older brother, blah, 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 right? Not that that's not important, but we want to make sure to give privilege to something that in the West, that's what this book is about. That these relationships are dominant in human experience. The West has sort of dried them up. That's the point of the book. It's not like, I've discovered something new and I'm going to teach you how to get to a higher spiritual plane. That's not what this book is about. That's a misreading. The book is about, it's right in front of your nose, but being a Westerner, you don't know how to privilege it. You don't know how to say the relationship is primary. You think that every individual is primary. Open up a little bit and you'll see it. That's what the book is about. Does that give you an answer? Sort of? Okay. Let's go a little further. We're going to go to a little further down. This is on page 4. The life of human beings is not passed in the sphere of transitive verbs alone. Transitive verbs are the ones that have a direct object. That's the whole point of this, that the you is not a direct object. It's a second person. It does not exist in virtue of activities alone, which have something for their object. Now, he's talking about the life of human beings, right? And he's saying that there's something other than transitive verbs. There's something additional. It's not saying that none of that's important, right? But there's something else that needs to have privilege, and that's something that doesn't have a direct object. So he gives examples. I perceive something, sensible of something, I imagine something, I will something, I feel something, I think something. The life of human beings does not consist of all this and the like alone. That's a big part of our world, but it's not all of our world. This and such things establish the realm of it. The realm of you has a different basis. So now we have to ask what the different basis is. What is a you if it's not a direct object? When you is spoken, the speaker has no thing for his object. Think about your experience in the exercise last week. Where there's a thing, there's another thing. You know, things, objects, you can replace them. You know, the famous statement in greedy capitalist employment that everybody has a replacement. We were saying nobody has a replacement. Your function may have a replacement, but a person cannot be replaced because he's unique. There's one thing, there's another thing. Every it is bounded by others. It exists only through being bounded by others. But when you is spoken, there is no thing. You has no bounds. So think about the exercise. When you is spoken, the speaker has no thing. You can't say, oh, here's what I got out of the exercise. That's not what he's talking about. He has indeed nothing. Nothing. There's no thing. But he takes his stand in relation. He's had the direct participation. It's not just an experience. Direct participation in something that happened. It's an event that takes place. It's a process. It's not something that can be reduced to a thing. And later on, he'll say, wait a minute. See, he talks to himself here. This book was created in dialogue over a year in a seminar that Buber taught in Frankfurt. And one of the things that he has his imaginary interlocutor, in other words, his students say to him is, what are you talking about? There's no other world. When I'm saying you, that means the whole world is wiped out, and there's only a you, which would be a schizoid, paranoid question, correct? Right? There's a you, and everything else is lost, right? And Buber's answer is no, there's still a whole world, but I'm seeing the whole world through the light of this relationship. In other words, the world is there, but my eyes are focused not on the world. My eyes are focused on you. And the rest of the world goes through that. It's all about everything else that's going on is connected through that relationship at that moment. So this is not mysticism in the sense of avoiding the world. It's mysticism, what Buber used to refer to it as concrete mysticism. Because it's not only thinking about things, which is philosophy, it's actually doing something which changes me, which cannot be expressed philosophically. If something can't be expressed, then you can say it's transcendent, but that's the end of the philosophical discussion. So what Buber is saying is that these moments create something. They're not about the world, they're creating the world. This is where the human world is created. And so clients who come to see us are looking for a creation. There was, I think I mentioned to you, Harry Stark Sullivan used to say, any hour where nothing happened is an hour wasted. And in our world, where there's an hour only once a week, and where somebody may have come after 10 years of not wanting to come, every hour where nothing happens may be the last hour for the next 20 years. So Buber is trying to help us to understand that the way we bring ourselves may make that hour happen. And if we are worried about that, we can't pull ourselves into it, then the hour may never happen again for that person. People come, if you want, for the I-thou relationship, for lots of other things too. They want to be less anxious, they want to sleep better, blah, blah, blah. But the way to do that in changing relationships is to enter into a relationship. Maria?
So in order for us to do that in the room, is it just a case of being present? I mean, is that the bottom line? Or?
Right. Yeah, the one way to say this is about presence, right? But you see, if I say, well, I'm being present, that's about me, isn't it? Right? So the word present, Buber uses it, but in English as in German, the word present also means present tense. It also means human presence, And in English, it also means a gift. It doesn't in German. In German, Gegenwart means I'm present, and it means the present tense. And it's made out of Gegen, which is like keneged, opposite, and Wart, which is waiting. You see, the idea is that the present tense is something that you open yourself to. You don't actually do it. You don't feel that you're doing something. We'll get to that in a minute. So let's continue on page 5. It said that man experiences his world. What does that mean? This is, for those of you who know some German or Yiddish, is the crucial word in Western philosophy, Erfahrung. Erfahrung, we translate as experience, but it means experience that you know something about. It's connected to, in French it's translated as an experience of knowledge, right? So man, we say we have experiences. What does that mean? Man travels over the surface of things and experiences them. Do you have that experience? Does that speak to you? You travel over the surface. Traveling in German is Befahrung, and experience is Erfahrung. So it's Fahrung. Fahrung is traveling. And so the idea is that that's the other translation. You can use it. Just
Just look for it.
the pages will be different, right? But we're not going fast, so it's towards the beginning. That you're sort of traveling over the surface of things. You know, you thought this, you thought that. Did anything happen? No. Am I changed? No. Was there a moment when something deep happened to me? No. He extracts knowledge about the Constitution from them. He wins an experience from them. He experiences what belongs to the things. We do that all the time. That's most of what we do. But the world is not presented to man by experience alone. Experience is partial. That's what this book is about, the other part. That it's nice to be able to, let's say, look at a picture and figure it out and analyze it, or to talk to somebody and have all these thoughts about the genogram and say, there it is, that's, you know, it's schlepping over from this generation, and it's a relationship like that. Those are experiences. These present him only in the world of it, he, she, and it. I experience something. Now here, there's an interesting, a little bit difficult section, but it's worth trying to understand what he means. If we add inner to outer experiences, nothing has changed. You see, psychology would like to say, well, you know, when I'm looking at the articles, if I'm looking at the chairs, and if I'm trying to figure out how the building is built, so that's not a real experience, but an inner experience where I feel something, that's different. Uber says, no, that's not the issue. An inner experience is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about relationships, not about inner experiences. That's an important distinction, an annoying distinction, a challenging distinction, but an important distinction for therapists. Because we think that somebody comes in and they tell us about their inner experience, and so that's what's been crucial, that they told us about the inner experience. That now they've said it and I've heard it, right? And so there's a content that's been experienced. And Buber's suggesting that's not all of it. That's part of it, that's not all of it. Something has gone on in the relationship. By saying something new to somebody who's hearing something new, something has changed in the eye of each of us while we're talking. It's not just the deep inner experience that was a content that was transmitted. There's something in the relationship that's happening while that's being transmitted. Pay attention to that as well. Does that make sense to you? You know, we would like to go to our supervisors and say, oh, and then, you know, he told me how he was deeply afraid of his father when his father used to come home and was in a bad mood. And this was very important to him to have said that. And if your supervisor happens to be following what we're doing here and says, and what happened between you when you were talking about that? That's a very important thing, the content. And what happened between you? Did you feel that there was a different relationship as that was being transmitted? Pay attention to that as well. That's what Buber said. Pay attention to it as well, not only, as well. And then there's an interesting section about mysticism. I experienced something. If we add secret to open experiences, nothing in the situation has changed. In other words, if it's If it's an experience that involves some sort of a secret of some sort, it's also another content. The question is something's being changed in the relationship. So we'll go a little bit to the next paragraph here. Are we okay? You following? We're taking a slow spazier here with Mordechai Levi Buber. Here's a Levi. That probably is important. As you know, in the 20th century, the two people who talked about the other person as significant were two Jews. One of them was Buber, who was a Levi, and the other was Emmanuel Levinas, who was a Levi. Yeah, Moshe.
I was looking forward to you reading the end.
Just a little louder.
I was looking forward to you reading the end of that paragraph.
The end, you want to read the end of it? Okay, the end of the paragraph, it's an annoying end, but that's part of the, Buber is a polemicist. He's talking against things, right? If we had secret to open experiences, nothing in the situation has changed. How self-confident is that wisdom which perceives a closed compartment in things reserved for the initiate and manipulated only with a key? He's talking about mystics, right? Secrecy without a secret, accumulation of information, it always is. You asked something about Buber. So Buber was raised in Lvov. He was the grandson of the one of the greatest of the people who started to study Midrash seriously. His grandfather was Shlomo Buber, and Buber's father divorced when Buber was 3. Buber's father was not religious already, and he was an agronomist. He moved to Vienna. Buber was born. When Buber was 3, his mother ran away with an actor to Russia, and he didn't see her again for 10 years, 12 years, and he had no relationship with her. We're talking about a boy, a very young boy, who was abandoned by his mother. Those of you who like biography say, well, all right, yeah, we got it, right? In other words, okay, so that's what he was looking for, that experience that was missing. That's a useful way to think, but not an exclusive way to think. Because the question is, okay, so my mother didn't abandon me, so I have nothing in common with that? That's not so useful, right? In other words, there are people who have very deep experiences, very centered experience. They redeem those experiences for all of us. That's what our clients do. Hopefully our lives have been less tortured than the lives of most of our clients. But there's a way in which, by focusing on the pain that they have, they tell us a lot about, something that's less challenged, but it's always, every aspect of human life is always there. Whether your mother wasn't listening when she had to cook the challah on Friday afternoon, or whether she ran away with an actor, and you never saw her again. There's something that overlays and that you can learn something about from these things. So Buber was raised he went back to live with his grandparents in Lvov, and so he was raised in Poland. And his mama Loshen was Yiddish, and throughout his whole life, when Buber would meet people and talk to them seriously, he spoke in Yiddish. And the truth is that Ayin Dao should have been written in Yiddish, but there was nobody to read it. Or one could say, people who read Yiddish don't need Ayin Dao, they live it. That's probably what Buber would have said. So Buber spent a lot of time with the Hasidim in Lvov. He used to go to the Klois where he used to daven. He stopped davening when he was 14. We have his bar mitzvah speech. So he was raised in this Hasidic environment, and something touched him very deeply about the experience of Polish Hasidut, this central Polish Hasidut in Lvov. And he knew a great deal about mysticism. He also knew a great deal about, he was probably one of the 2 most important Jews to make mysticism, Kabbalah, important to the Western world. The other one was Gershon Scholem, who he used to argue with all the time. Buber's feeling here, what he's trying to say is that, what have I learned from Hasidus? I didn't learn from Hasidus to figure out which Sphira is doing this or doing that. I learned from Hasidus how to relate to people. He learned it from Hasidut. The whole idea of you, or the familiar you, is from Hasidut. So what he's here saying is that don't get lost in mysticism. If it doesn't make your relationships present, you're still in the world of it. You may think you're in the world of God knows where, but the relationship is what makes the you possible. Yeah?
I'm wondering why
simple idea, but I feel like it could be written in a much simpler way that people could understand.
Right. The question is, why on earth is it written so complicated? And if you want, by the way, I didn't have a chance to do it this week. There was a student of Buber's thinking in England who wrote it in simple English. If you want, I'll put it up and you can follow that. But it doesn't have the poetry of Buber. Now, you can say there's two answers. The first answer is Buber's answer, because people asked him his whole life. This was in 1923, he died in 1965. He was 45 then, he lived a long life. And for the next 40 years, people were saying, Buber, write it simple, why can't you write it simple? Buber's answer was, I didn't write it, so I can't change it. I didn't write it because after a year of torture and all sorts of turnabouts, it came to me this way. This is how it came to me. It was some sort of a gift. People talk about inspiration. It was some sort of a gift, and I'm passing it over to people the way I received it. You want to make it simple? You make it simple. But I'm not changing. If I change the text, we'll lose something. And to tell you the truth, I don't know what we'll lose, because I didn't write it. I'm always learning something new from it. And that's Buber's answer. The book is still in print. It's almost 100 years old and still in print. If you Google it on Amazon, if you go to Amazon, see comments. So there are two sets of comments about this book. Now, in 2018. Half of the people write what you just said. Yeah, why did I have to read this book? It doesn't, it's a total confusion. And the other half say, I don't know why, but this book changed my life. Those are the experiences that people have 100 years after it was written. There's another answer. And the other answer I'll tell you from the person who taught it to me. There's a Jew who probably isn't very popular in your circles called Zalman Schachter. Zalman Schachter was a genius. He was very close to Shlomo Carlebach, and he was very deep into Chassidut. He was what was known as the Chassid of the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was already a Chassid of the Rebbe before the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he became not so observant, but very deeply involved in all religions. And I had a session scheduled in Haifa to talk about Buber. And Zalman Googles himself, and he sees that there were two sessions in Haifa. How does he get to Haifa? Because there are two sessions about the theology of Zalman Schachter. So he says, I see that you're giving a talk about Buber. I said, right. He said, it's impossible. And, so when somebody who's like a Rebbe talks that way, you listen. I said, why is it impossible? He said, look, at his 10th Yortzeit in 1975, we did exercises. You can't learn Buber from the book. You can only learn from, you can't talk about Buber, you can only do Buber. We're talking. I said to him, Zalman, I think what you're telling me is that I and Thou is not a book, it's an exercise. And there are people from Middle European backgrounds who on the phone can do that. You hear it. That's what I'm saying. So that's the second answer, which is that this book is not a book, it's an exercise. Or as one student, I wish I remembered her name, told me when somebody said, this book I can't get the heads and tails, she said, the 31st time it started to open up. You just can't, you have to keep reading it. So I can tell you, because I was involved in some translation of it, that about the 50th time it starts to open up in a different way. And so I'm trying to give you over a gift that somebody gave us. And, like all gifts, you do with it what you can. But those are two ways of looking at it, which hopefully don't expect it to make it simple. There's another piece of it also, which is that there wasn't language in 1923 to talk about relationships. There wasn't even a word for relationship in German or in any Western language except probably Yiddish. Yiddish is all about relationship. So when Buber used the word relationship, he was criticized that they're using this strange word. The strange word in German is Beziehung, and Beziehung actually means a philosophical relationship, how something's connected to something, but not a living relationship. And he was criticized, using this philosophical term, you find it in Hegel. Who's going to understand you? Buber's answer was, wait. It turns out that Today, when a man wants to be in a relationship with a woman in Facebook, he's in a relationship, the word is Beziehung. In other words, the Buber schlepped this word into modern German and actually became, like poetry changes the use of it became the word for relationship. I think he got it from Yiddish, because I think in Yiddish, Beziehung, it's the same word, meant relationship all along, because Yiddish is not a philosophical language, it's about relationships. So anyway, he was trying to create language that didn't exist. The word interpersonal did not exist. He created it, zwischen Menschen. And what you find is that this is a search for a way that has influenced all of us. In other words, the idea of IU has become part of intellectual property of the whole Western world. That's why it's still in print. Nobody reads it. People use the word IU, and it's not in their bibliography, including in family therapy. So that's what the second paper is about. So, yeah, Reza.
I just want to share my experience. When I was reading the pages, I just felt that if I have to the book an ideal relationship to how he writes, then I had a real experience of what he's saying. But if I had an I-it relationship to what he's saying, meaning to say, I think that what he was writing in a way that if you are in a certain relationship with the words that he writes, that you grasp it. It's something you grasp, not something you understand.
Right, so Rezi is bringing up, I think, what Zalman said to me, that this book is an exercise. It tries to say you. If you let it say you, something will happen. You won't know what happened exactly, but something will happen. And you'll become more open to this sort of, to paying attention to these sorts of things. So you read it like a chassid. He wrote it like a chassid. And you read it like a chassid. You know, it's something that speaks to you. It's not meant to be about something. It's supposed to speak to you. And I think that what you're saying is important. Did anybody else have that experience? Yeah.
I think it's also a bit like, Shakespeare or any of these great works, you can even say the Torah. It's not just words. There's something, there's that experience, like you were explaining, like almost a relationship with what you're reading.
Right. As you're saying, it's like most great works of literature or poetry, that there's more in it than just the content. There's something about the music. The greatest scholar of Buber, Paul Mendes Floor, just wrote a new biography of Buber at the Yale University Press, for those who just want to run and read more about Buber, used to say, it's a symphony. There are themes, there are variations, it comes back. You can't read it like words. It's more like music. That's the invitation of using this work here in family therapy. And that makes all of us outliers, because nobody teaches Buber in a course in family therapy theory. But ever since I happened upon it, I can't not do it because something happens to people. So you have to make the connection. Younger.
I would have thought that Buber's answer would have been that he wrote it like this on purpose because you have to deconstruct it. Like the same way people learn Gemara. Like you need to analyze it and pull it apart and sort of deconstruct it in a way that you can't just read it simply. And that way you have to go back to it again and again until you enter into a relationship with it. I don't know, that's...
So Maria said it's sort of like one way of studying Gemara, which is that you have to take the pieces apart and figure out how it was put together, and the connections between the pieces is more important than the words. Sometimes that's where you see the connection between this line and that line. That's what's saying something. That's true. There's another way of looking at the book, which is that sometimes when you're reading Gemara, Lahavdil, this is Buber, right? But when you're reading Gemara, God speaks to you. In other words, that something of the Holy Spirit of what was going on in the people who were having this discussion opens up. And it's not exactly a content, and it's not even a deconstruction, it just opens up. It's not the first time around. The Gaon probably thought it was the 101st time around. But since something opens up, now that's important for understanding one other thing about Buber. Buber's idea about, this is a book about God, not about people. People are on the way to God. But the book is about the fact that the only thing you can say, Buber's consideration. So the only thing you can really say to God is you. Okay, but if you put that backwards, you can say all of religious writing is trying to pass on an experience of I-you, of the direct second-person relationship to God. And so when Buber translated Psalms into German, Shem Hashem, when it's used as second person, because Shem Hashem appears second and third person, when it recurs second person, he translated it as you. And if you read that translation, it's extraordinary. Not that I'm suggesting you replace the original, nor would Buber think so, but in order to make German readers understand the religious import of Tehillim, he needed to translate David HaMelech's use of Shem Hashem as a way of speaking second person. And it works. It's not all of it, but it works in a very beautiful way. So Buber's feeling about religion is that religions transmit moments of I-you, and that when people create I-you with each other, that's a religious moment. Buber is not a philosopher, he's a theologian. We might translate it as, the Shekhinah Shorah, right? That between two people who are saying you to each other, that's the you is informed by the ultimate you, right? And so you're finding something in the relationship with people that connects you in a different way to the Holy One. Now, you can take that, different people have different traditions. Some people will find that to be, well, what's up, choruses? Some people say, but that's what Rabbi something said too. It's out there. This is a Jewish book. It's so Jewish a book that it hardly mentions Judaism. But Jews who read it know that it's a Jewish book. Which Jew? Okay, Martin Buber, some Levi and Lvov. There were some other questions. Zalman, did you have a question?
Yeah. I don't have a lot of things going through my head right now.
That's good.
I think the overwhelming feeling is confusion.
Okay.
I think, what I see, you mentioned the connection, that Razy mentioned the connection that she felt, and I felt that connection when you read his book. I kind of felt like, what in the world is he talking about? I know that there's depth here, and I'm appreciating your connection to the book. Like, there's something here that I don't see yet. I think what I'm wondering is, why is this not taught by other people? Is it ignorance, or is it just they don't think it's important, even though they understand it's out there? And what would you be lacking?
What would I what?
What would you be lacking in your life as a therapist if you didn't have it?
Right. Okay, a couple of questions, important ones. One is well, let's take the last question first, because we're not chachamim here, we're therapists, so a little bit befuddled. What would be missing if you didn't know about this? The question before is, why don't other people teach it if it's so important? So the last question is, Buber would say, you don't need me to have this. This is a human experience. I'm just trying to, point out what it is. I haven't created this. This happens all the time. In the West, people don't give it privilege. And so for therapists, he would say, are there therapists who give it privilege? Oh yeah. I think Buber would say, probably the least Buberians are the Buberians, because they're thinking about being Buberians. Just, there's an I there that can say second person, and that's what happens. You talk about it, you don't talk about it, that's another story. Now, why don't people teach? The second article that you have in the reading list approaches that. Aside from the fact that, Americans have patience for about one line of something that's written this way, the other thing is that this is a book about God. It's a book about God. The third part of the book is about man's relationship to God, and nobody in therapy reads about that. God forbid. Freud decided that was, Freud, it didn't work for him, so he said it can't work for anybody. Freud had his limitations too. But therapists in general try to shy away from anything that's so-called religious. And what Buber was trying to do is to say, when you use the word religious, maybe you're not getting it, right? Because, where do you think he's not? Where do you think where do you think anything's hiding here? Just open yourself to a second person, and you'll find that it's there. So, so as I said, I've always been teaching it simply because I see that it does something to people. It makes therapists ask that one extra piece of, is something happening to me? Because it's mutual. All I-thou relationships are mutual. There are moments when you offer an I-thou and the other person isn't there. Those are painful moments. But when it exists, it's mutual. So that means that when something happens to the room, how do I know something happened in the room? Because something happened to me. And if nothing happened to me, then maybe nothing happened in the room. That's an important part for therapists to understand. If you don't read Buber, you don't understand that? No. There are good therapists all over who understand that. But this is one useful way for people who have a little bit of patience with language to conceptualize it. You see, when family therapy, in 1978, family therapy was about 10 years old, 15 years old. And so, it's sort of as a bar mitzvah, they were saying, so what are we all about? And so there were these articles called the Great Epistemological Debate, and people wrote, what is family therapy about? The 4 central articles all said family therapy is about allowing the I-thou relationship to become present in families. All 4. None of them had I-thou in the references. In other words, the idea is there. This is one way to get to it. Life is another way to get to it. Buber said, if you can find it in life, skip the book, right? But I think the book helps some of us to get to it more clearly. There's one section that I do want to read with you before we go to the... and that's on page 16. Is anybody following the screen? Should I scroll through it? 6 and more pages. Okay, 16 at the bottom of the page, the last section. But this is the exalted melancholy of our fate, that every thou in our world must become an it. It doesn't matter how exclusively the thou was in the direct relation, as soon as the relation, that's the bitzin, as soon as the relation has been worked out or permeated with a means, the thou becomes an object among objects, perhaps the chief, but still one of them, fixed in its size and its limits. Now, this is, the word exalted appears only here in the book. In German it's erhabene, and the first sentence is, das ist aber die erhabene Schwermut unseres Losses. The translation is quite reasonable. There's a pain. When the thou becomes an it, there's a pain. Schwermut. Schwermut is often the word for melancholy, but the word schwer is there, right? It's not easy. Something is hard. And so what Buber is trying to say is that, see, I'm telling you about the wonderful aspect of when you can enter into the relationship. But when you enter into it, it's going to be lost. It's a moment. It's not forever. And in order to enter into it, you'll find that you have 2 kinds of clients who are afraid to enter into it, which are 2 sides of ourselves as well. One is, if I enter the I-thou, I lose the I. What happens? What is this? Is this a union? Is this what might be called the bitul? Hayesh? Is it something where the I is no longer present? Because Buber's been saying all along, that's when the I is most present. It just doesn't know about it. Why don't you know about it? Because you're totally engaged. When you're totally engaged, you're not thinking about how you're being engaged. You're just engaged. So that's total presence. That's the I of IU is the more full I, right? The I of it is a partial I. The I becomes more full. The I becomes more full in the relationship. Does that sound paradoxical? It scares the daylights out of some people. They say, wait a minute, I'm going to enter this, there's not going to be any I left. Because I'm busy thinking about my I. I'm always holding on to my I. I can't let it go into a relationship. And so Buber says, well, it feels like it's passive. It's not passive at all. It feels like it's passive because you're not doing anything to know about it. In other words, something's happening to you that's been happening when you're not thinking about the fact that it's happening. And so some people feel, I can't afford to do that. You'll see it in couples, you'll see it in families, where I can't afford the kind of emotional intimacy that I'm going to be wiped out. There's not going to be any I. That's an illusion, right? It's a Western illusion. But that scares the daylights out of probably women more than men, that I'm going to lose myself if I allow this so-called merger. It is not about a merger. It's about a relationship, not about a merger. It's not about becoming one with the other person. It's about a relationship where the two people are preserved, but they're in relation. And the second, which you'll find probably more among men, but not only, is this pain. The pain. In other words, the people say, I can't go in because I can't bear to come out. I can't bear when the you becomes an it. I can't bear when the relationship is suspended, which will happen after 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 20 seconds. It's not very long, the moments of IU. And what is that pain? It's unavoidable pain. That is what it's about to be human. That we have the possibility of saying second person. We do not have the possibility of prolonging the second person. We don't have that possibility. And so there's a pain involved, and you'll find that two things. One is that in a session where the IU becomes present, that when it stops, pay attention to the pain. Pay attention to the fact that somebody's, when coming out of IU, they're not celebrating that they were in the IU. They're feeling the pain of losing the IU. And there are some clients who you'll find who say, those moments I can't bear when they're over. I can't bear it. You know, if a husband is blaming his wife, he'll say, well, I was just trying to have some, and she dropped me, right? And it's actually that she didn't drop him, but that those moments are limited, and he can't bear the pain, so he's sure that it was never there or so forth. So that moment of people who, if you think about co-creation, people who stay away, they avoid co-creation because they can't bear the pain of stopping the co-creation, that you will find nowhere in therapeutic literature, as far as I know. But I think it's very important, and I think that as you go along and become more adept meeting with people, you'll find it. And when you find it and you can recognize it, that will be very, very important. People have this exalted melancholy, they have this pain, which is unavoidable, but it means that you have to accept it. Those who like Melanie Klein would say, that's the depressive position. Why is it depressive? Because it understands that pain is always necessary within human life. Melanie Klein and Buber were not good friends, but you can always put them together. In other words, there's something about accepting pain and being able to bear pain that's not so simple. Just a word, I read all of your comments. As people who didn't, I don't think we have all of the sheets from last week, so if you didn't, so bring them back. We're trying to improve as we go along. We're trying to dialogue. We're trying to create a course that suits many of you as much as possible. I understand that reading has not been a great part of what you've been doing up to now. And frankly, that's not so important up until next session. From next session on, we started to learn family therapy. And so there's one book that puts it all together as theory of family therapy, and it would be useful to try to read that. And starting next time, we're going to be using the Family Crucible as our case, so it'll be useful to be reading that and reading the section that's connected to it. In other words, here we have Martin Buber. This is the end of a sort of a long sugya here of what's an I, what's a relationship, what's co-creation, where does that fit into families. And so we're going to be leaving that, and we're going to keep that in mind, because we're always going to come back to it. But we're going to start reading what everybody else reads. Apropos the question of why doesn't everybody else read, we're going to start reading what everybody else reads. And so start reading. The other stuff you can always recollect. The blog has been transformed. There was a feeling that it was a little bit too heavy, and having 2 blogs would be too heavy. And anyway, you're a learning group. You're a learning group with me and with Barbara and the supervision. So to be a learning group, you should have, there was a request that there be 1 blog for the group, not necessarily about the course. So Javi retweaked that, and now there is 1 blog that's for the entire group. And at this point, I say to you, figure out how it works for you. Figure out how it works for you. It's a tool that some people expressed was enormously interesting. Apparently it's not enormously interesting for everybody, nor does it need to be for everybody. I invite you to make use of it in a way that communication about the experience that you're having and what's going on here will be reflected for those of you who you want to communicate with and who are interested in it. And we'll follow it, and we'll see what you do to create it. But it's now the way you wanted it. It's now your blog. So I will follow it, Barbara will follow it, the supervisors who are interested, not all of them, will follow it, and that way we'll try to hold together the whole experience. We're going to repeat the experience that we did last week, and hopefully learn some more about it, and same time as last week. See you next week.
Is there classes?
Sorry?